there, Mary Elizabeth Parker here. I'm sorry that this week's Random Fact Friday is a little late, so it's really more, by the time it gets up, hopefully it won't be Monday, but Random Fact Sunday! So this week I chose to concentrate on a great musician that we all have heard of, I assume, Mozart. So let's start at the beginning. So Mozart was born in Salzburg, Austria in 1756, and he died in Vienna, Austria in 1791 at the age of 35. He was baptized as Johannes Chrysostomus Wolfgangus Theophilus, or Theophilus, not sure on the Greek pronunciation, I'm sorry, Mozart. Theophilus means loved by God in Greek, but he liked to use the Latin translation of Amadeus. Fun random parts is that he was a tenor, and his family nicknamed him Wolfie. So there are varying schools of thought regarding which hand Mozart has as his dominant hand. Some think he was truly left-handed, but others believe he may have in fact been ambidextrous, meaning he can use both hands equally. And education at that time tended to favor right-handedness, but that doesn't mean he wasn't fully adept with his left. Plus, for a long time, his father was actually his teacher, so he may not have decided to try to force a switching of the hands. That's just my speculation, of course. So there are reports that he may have been ambidextrous, he may have been left-handed, and he may have been right-handed. There's no absolute proof of any of these. So they can only basically make conjecture. All we can really say is he was amazing at playing piano with both hands, and other instruments for that matter. Before he could even write words, he was able to write music. Mozart was born a Catholic and remained a member for his entire life, and some of his greatest works were religious works. While in Rome as a child, the Pope awarded him the Order of the Golden Spur. Now, this is a papal order of knighthood given to those who have rendered distinguished service in propagating the Catholic faith or who have contributed to the glory of the Church, either by feat of arms, by writings, or by other illustrious acts. So, having his music already being very religious and composing religious music at such a young age, he was already receiving awards for this. So he's also known to be able to listen to music just once and write it down from memory without any mistakes. One of the notable times of this was a piece called Allegri's Miserere. I probably mispronounced it, sorry. So when Mozart visited the Sistine Chapel as a child, but I've found reports that say 14 years old. In that time period, I don't know how much of a child that is. He astonished everyone when he remembered and wrote it down later in the day, note for note. Allegri's Miserere. Only 3 authorized copies of the work were distributed prior to 1770, and none succeeded in capturing the beauty of the piece as performed at the Sistine Chapel annually. And later that day, or not later that day, on that Wednesday he went, and then on Friday he returned to make minor corrections. But then he met a British historian named Charles Burney, who obtained the piece from Mozart, and then he took it to London and published it in 1771. And from what I could find, it looks like that was when Mozart was in town for his papal award. So, fun. Mozart was the first person to compose piano concertos as we know them today. Piano concertos are like lively conversations between the piano and the orchestra. Sometimes I wonder if that has to do with how musical his family was, because his sister was also a very established musician and only stopped performing when she got married. So it makes me wonder, were they able to play back and forth, and was that some of the inspiration for his concertos, or was it more just in his head? Well, I guess we will never know. In addition to composing perfect fugues and operas, Mozart also had a sense of humor. That frequently included references to scatology. Now, scatology is an obsession with flatulence and defecation, so basically potty humor. And it appears that the entire Mozart family wrote strange things to each other. So at least, it's a whole family who finds things funny, presumably. And he loved wordplay and often made up various nicknames for his friends, such as Countess Makewater, Princess Dunghill, Prince Potbelly von Pigtail, and Duchess Smackbottom. Yeah, you thought this stuff was new. No, name calling went way back then to their friends. Probably even further. Now we are going to discuss Requiem a little bit. So Count Franz von Walsegg commissioned Mozart to write his famous Requiem. This was following the death of the Count's 20-year-old wife, Anna. The Count, only 28 at this time, never remarried. But he wanted Mozart to leave his name off of the Requiem Mass. Walsegg had a penchant for commissioning works from composers of the day and then passing them off as his own in private performances. Mozart died before completing the Requiem, and Costanze, his wife, arranged for several other composers to complete the work in order to get the remainder of the sum promised from the Count. The main one being one of his students, which I will mention a little later. In Vienna, at one point he performed for Empress Maria Theresa and amused her by asking one of her young daughters to marry him. This daughter was Marie Antoinette, the future Queen of France. Some other composers that might be interesting to see the overlap of. Mozart studied Bach and Handel, both of whom influenced his music, specifically fugal passages in the Magic Flute and the final of Symphony No. 41. He also had critiques of them, of course, but he did study them as well. And then when Mozart met Haydn, whichever way you want to pronounce it, I've heard both ways, in Vienna in 1784, they actually became friends, and they would sometimes play together in impromptu string quartets. I don't know who the other two in the quartet were, unless they somehow grew extra limbs to do extra parts, but and then Mozart actually dedicated 6 quartets to his friend. While Mozart was working under Emperor Joseph II in 1787, a young Beethoven spent several weeks in Vienna hoping to study under Mozart. No one is sure if they ever met. There are reports of Beethoven having gone to see Mozart perform, but that doesn't mean that they met. But it is nice to know that, again, another generation is learning from the one before, and music influences the new artists, no matter how far back you go. And those artists were inspired by the artists before them, and etc., etc. Now, improvising. There's a German musicologist who specializes in Mozart, named Ron Behrens, and he suggests that at least on one occasion, Mozart met a deadline by simply not writing down part of the music and improvising it instead while performing for the audience. So I guess the belief is that he didn't write the bass, aka the left hand, at all, and did a simple melody line for the right hand or the top part. There are reports he might have done this quite frequently, and then later it would be recorded by someone else. Recorded as in transcribed, not records, because they didn't have that yet. Pretty amazing to be able to just come up with it on the fly like that. Many experts hypothesize that Mozart may have suffered from either ADHD or Tourette's. I can't help but wonder if maybe part of it was that he would grow frustrated that people's minds didn't necessarily work as quickly as his, especially when it came to music. Maybe that's why the following happened. Apparently, he liked to imitate a cat, especially when he was rehearsing an opera with his singers. It is said he would easily get bored and began swiftly leaping over tables and chairs while meowing. Now, it's also reported that Freddie Mercury liked to talk to his cats, but I don't know. I'm wondering if Andrew Lloyd Webber got wind of this, and that's why he was inspired to adapt T.S. Eliot's poems into the musical Cats. Kind of wonder what Mozart would have done if he had the chance. So, according to Costanzi, at the end of his life, Mozart believed he was being poisoned and that he was composing his requiem for himself. He died before finishing, and his student Franz Sussmayer was the main person who completed the work. And this is the version that we most often hear today. Scholars debate which parts were truly written by Mozart and which ones were written by his student or the other contributors. But that was the main contributor. There is no proof or evidence at all that Mozart was being poisoned by someone. But we'll get more into that a little bit. Mozart fell ill while in Prague for the September 6, 1791 premiere of his opera La Clemenza di Tito. Even while ill, he was occupied with the task of finishing his requiem. Soon after, on December 5th in 1791, he did die at home. Now, the symptoms that he had at the time of his death include, maybe aren't limited to, these are just the ones I found, were that his body was very swollen, also known as edema. In fact, he was so swollen he couldn't even turn himself over in bed. He had a high fever, which was treated with cold compresses. He lost consciousness before death, malaise, back pain, and rash. Now, on the death record, even though it wasn't required at that time to do so, the reason for death, according to that, is fever and rash, which in and of itself is not a disease, it's a symptom. And when Mozart died, this is rather heartbreaking. When Mozart died, his wife Costanzi was so upset that she crawled into bed with her dead husband so she could catch his illness and die with him. Obviously, they really cared for each other, and losing someone you love is heartbreaking and impossible to really describe. So, let's get back to his death. Researchers have hypothesized at least 118 causes of death for Mozart. These include syphilis, the effects of treatment with salts of mercury, also mercurial poisoning, which was until, I think, the top one until recently, for belief, rheumatic fever, vasculitis leading to renal failure, infection from a bloodletting procedure, trichinosis from eating undercooked pork chops, poison, which, like I said, for regular traditional poisons, not mercurial poisoning, there's no evidence of this. Sorry, you didn't poison him. And then new studies in 2009 suggested that the most likely cause that they can figure out at this time was a streptococcal infection. Mozart was the youngest of 7 children and only one of 2 of them to survive. He himself had 6 children, but only 2 survived infancy. And neither of his 2 sons, Carl Thomas and Franz Xaver, married or had children. At least that we know of. So I think it would be really difficult to try to trace his line back for various reasons. No one is sure where Mozart's body is. He was buried according to the custom of the time in a simple grave. He had no graveside ceremony or a grave marker. Now, a simple grave is not to be confused with a communal or a pauper's grave. Those were actually different things. A common grave was for someone not of the aristocracy. aristocratic level. And one of the main differences is that common graves were subject to excavation after 10 years, while the graves of aristocrats were not. So chances are, after he was buried for 10 years, he was likely moved. Different countries have different ways, and at that time period I'm not sure what their way was. I know some graveyards will exhume the body after so much time and move it to a different area of the place, or they will then burn the body and put the ashes somewhere and inter them there. So who knows where his remains are now. Mozart's wife destroyed many of his sketches and drafts after his death. I wish I could see that stuff, but maybe there was a reason. Maybe he even asked her to ahead of time. You never know. And in 1801, gravedigger Joseph Rothmeyer allegedly dug up Mozart's skull from a cemetery in Vienna. How he would know which unmarked grave it was, I don't know, but he allegedly did this. However, even after various testing, it remains uncertain whether the skull is in fact Mozart's. That's why I say, being that his children didn't have descendants either, it would probably be really difficult to find DNA to try to match it up with. And for now, it is locked away at the Mozarteum Foundation in Salzburg, Austria. The soundtrack to the 1984 film Amadeus, number 56 on the Billboard album charts, making it one of the most successful classical music albums ever. So, if you haven't seen the movie, there are, of course, as usual, there are going to be licenses taken with the truth. It's not 100% accurate. It is based on the play, which recently National Theatre did a live version. I did not get to see it. I was working when it was in the local theater, or at least the last time. Maybe they'll bring it back. They've done that before. And so it does have a lot to do with Mozart and his later days, I believe, and his dealings with Salieri. But like I said, it does take a lot of, it does incorporate some fiction into his story. All biographies should be taken with a grain of salt, at least to some extent. I like to corroborate with multiple ones where I can. Now, another legacy he has is something called the Mozart effect. This is the belief that in 1993, actually, I'll discuss when it was first really discussed. In 1993, Rauscher and others made a surprising claim that after listening to Mozart's sonata for 2 pianos for 10 minutes, normal subjects showed significantly better spatial reasoning skills than after listening to periods of relaxation instructions designed to lower blood pressure or silence. Now, I think that they could have come up with a better control. Is that something where it's any musician? Because none of those were music specifically, or at least music on its own. Could it be that any kind of music would have this effect? Would any classical music have this effect, or is it only Mozart? Is it only that piece from Mozart, etc.? So there have been alternating. Yeah, my friend hates it when I show the notes, but there have been questions as to whether or not this actually exists. The generality of the original positive findings has been criticized on the grounds that any Mozart effect is due to enjoyment arousal occasioned by this particular music and would not take place in the absence of its appreciation. This interpretation is countered by animal experiments in which separate groups of rats were exposed in utero, followed by a postpartum period of 60 days to Mozart's Piano Sonata K448, to minimalist music by the composer Philip Glass, to white noise, or to silence, and then tested for the ability to negotiate a maze. The Mozart group completed the maze test significantly more quickly and with fewer errors than the other 3 groups. Thus, enjoyment and musical appreciation is unlikely to have been the basis of the improvement. Now, for those who've are not familiar with Philip Glass, he's a little avant-garde with his style. It's not the traditional music composition. So it can be a little cacophonous for some people. I enjoy it, but I'm not everybody. I'm very eclectic in my musical taste. So I got this article from PubMed, which is actually where a lot of people in academic life get their articles for research, because it's actually usually really reliable research and will cite all of the backup. But yeah, there's a lot that we can thank Mozart for, mostly enjoyment, and I enjoy his music, even though I will admit Handel's my favorite. I don't know why I chose to do Mozart this week, but I did, and hopefully you learned something new, and if not, hopefully you'll be excited that somebody is trying to get that information out there. Thank you for watching. I'm sorry again that this video is going up so late. I hope you have a great day, and thank you for watching. Please be kind to each other.